Ranking every boss in Lords of the Fallen based on how good it is, taking into account the mechanics, appearance, surrounding lore, and of course difficulty and balance. Starting things off with the first boss, if you could call it that, and that's the Holy Bulwark Otto. Not much to say about this guy, he's just kind of a standard knight. It's a decent first kind of fake out intro fight, but that's really all it has to it. It's a D tier. The Mistress of Hounds is annoying. This boss fight clearly intends you to have upgraded gear before you go in, but if you don't actually do that, killing the hounds is a big pain. I think it maxes out at 2 hounds now, but before there could be 3, even 4 of them chasing you at a time. This amount of enemies kind of makes it feel more like a gank rather than a boss fight. Now, to its credit, it does force you to learn that two-handing a weapon or kicking will be more effective in certain situations. But overall, I just don't think the fight is that well made, so I'm just going to put it in D tier. Pieta is the first actual boss fight in the game, and this is really well designed, with different attack combos, mix-ups. They're all really well telegraphed, and the fight is just a good first boss fight. She teaches you how to dodge, parry, a little bit of map awareness, just very mechanically sound. She's also got good lore and a good appearance, so I think A tier or even S tier is pretty fair. The Scourged Sister is a fight. There's not really much to say. It's an easy first mini boss, and that's about it. There's a reason this becomes a normal enemy later on, so I'm just gonna put it in D tier. The Congregator of Flesh. This boss probably catches most people off guard, since I definitely wasn't expecting to fight a boss immediately after the Hound Lady. This boss is solid and it has a creepy design. It fits really well with its environment. It's just really gross with all the corpses falling everywhere. The moveset is pretty limited. It basically just has the hop attack, sludge wave, slide attack, and a few simple combos. Not the most complex thing, but it is a good fight overall. So I'm just gonna think maybe high B tier or even low A is pretty fair. Damarose is one of those NPC fights, and I think I'll just rank all the NPCs right now. Damarose really doesn't have anything in her kit at all, like neither does Kukajin. You could argue that their lore is decent, but this is mainly a boss tier list. In D tier, both of them go. Andreas of Ebb has a better story of the 3 that I've mentioned so far, and he's got the most interesting fight overall. It's just in a narrow area, and all he really does is try to punish combo attacks with parries. I'm inclined for C tier since the fight is better set up, and it's kind of satisfying to get rid of this smug guy. Again, it's nothing too special. The Tortured Prisoner is the best of the 4. It actually feels like you're fighting a spellcaster, and she's also got the best background story from these NPCs by far. I actually think C tier, or even low B tier, because putting her in the same tier as Andreas of Ebb doesn't really feel right. And since we're talking about NPCs, I guess I'll rank Harkin here as well. Now this guy actually has the best background story since the entire previous game is about him. His story in this game is pretty solid as well, and there are 2 variants of the fight depending on if he gets the rune or not. Let's be honest, this guy kinda got shafted for his boss fight. The area is super tiny and his movesets are mainly AoE attacks in this claustrophobic bridge. It's arguably a good NPC fight, but I can't help but feel they could have just done more. So much more with this character. B tier, I guess. The Hollow Crow. I don't know if this counts as a boss fight. It's more of just a bunch of enemies and then you dodge his attacks in between the enemy phases. The presentation is really nice. I would have liked to actually fight this thing, like the Lightreaper got to. We can see he fought him in a memory. I don't know why we couldn't. I had high hopes for this one, especially since it showed up and looked really cool, but it's just an annoying fight with drawn out phases. The Kinrangr Guardian? I think that's how you pronounce it. Before we rank this guy, we have to rank the Mendacious Visage. Now, the face is alright. You gotta use the lamp to open it, or I guess you could wait, but that takes forever. And this thing just becomes a super common enemy paired along with previous mini-bosses. It's not bad, it's just kinda overused. I think that kinda holds it back. We'll just put it in C tier. And back to the Ice Warrior. This fight is actually kinda dumb. I'm not a big fan. With the wolves and him being immune to damage and the face just ready there to pull you into Umbral, this is kind of more of a gank than a fight. Got some interesting things like how you should exit the water to be a little bit more mobile, so you kind of have to be aware of your surroundings, but that's about it, and just the fact that you have to remove damage immunity at the beginning, not great. Hushed Saint. I'm gonna start by saying I like this boss. The first time I fought him, I found the way that it rides around being really cool, and I like the way he mixes up by popping out of the ground during attacks in the second phase, and even doing a spear throw during the first phase. I just kind of find it really cool. Now the horse riding phase does drag on a long time, and I see why a lot of people don't like it. But I also learned that if you pop the umbral balloon thingies that are scattered throughout the entire map, it will knock him off his horse as he rides by. Or if you don't want to pop the umbral balloons, you can even parry him off the horse. So contrary to what many people say, you can actually do something during this phase and end it pretty much immediately. His actual movesets and everything is actually really solid. So I actually do believe that putting him in A tier is quite fair. The Crimson Rector. This is an interesting fight. It's got a cool moveset and the fight is decent overall. The healing mechanic that he can do is pretty dumb though. You can cancel it out, but just the fact that he can do it is not great. And for some reason in co-op, this boss just does not care. I never really found this issue in single player, but again in co-op, he just kind of cranks these like 180 degree, 270 degree turns and hits you with pretty much every attack, even when you should dodge it. It's a little bit annoying, he's alright, put him in C tier. The Lightreaper. A cool boss that you're supposed to die to the first time you encounter it, and probably the second time as well. This boss is a menace before the game starts, and proceeds to be your biggest rival throughout the game. So the lore and setup for this boss is good, and the boss fight itself is really nice. He has a wide range of attacks and moves. He's a quick boss where if you learn the attack patterns and the moveset that he has, you can do a lot. You can punish certain attacks, completely avoid others, and then he's also got 3 phases. The first phase ends pretty quickly, the second one is a little bit more difficult, and the third one is where he kinda goes crazy, summoning the dragon and everything to fight while you fight him. I personally think it's a really well designed fight. Now I know the biggest issue people have is the dragon phase because it lasts a decent amount of time, but the fire breath and slam attacks are super easy to dodge once you know what you're doing. And to the criticism of him being damage immune and there's absolutely nothing you can do during this phase, to that I reply with skill issue. S tier. And I want to talk about this one now. The Paladin's Burden. Probably my favorite side quest in the entire game. The fight itself is pretty cool. It's basically just teaching you the game's PvP since Isaac just spams spells and kinda heals. The boss fight is alright. It's kinda one of the better NPC fights in the game, and again the setup is really good. The thing that I actually think pulls this guy over to rank a little bit higher is the fact that you can summon him to help in the Lightreaper fight. So some people might disagree, but I actually think putting him in B tier is pretty fair. The Ruiner. This guy is a great mini-boss. He's got a good set of attack moves, and while the fight takes place on a bridge, it actually has a fair amount of room. The only problem I really have with this boss fight is its little totem buffing thing, since my go-to strat for dealing with this is walking away until it's out of range. But the boss honestly has it all. He's got a cool design, good mechanics, you can knock him off the bridge, he's well telegraphed, etc. Only problem is this guy gets paired a bit too much with high health enemies later on, like himself. Still an A tier though. The Infernal Enchantress. Surrounded by a vortex of fire that makes it super annoying to hit her with any melee weapon at the beginning, unless you destroy the umbral balloons. Then it goes away and she's a super easy takedown. That, or you can camp the spawn area and just use ranged attacks, and this enemy really feels overused in the game, and it's kind of paired with even worse groups than the Ruiner. Also the fact that it has this crazy range with its fire orbs where it can keep attacking you even though there's no line of sight, makes it really annoying and honestly kind of just makes me hate this enemy. Even though the boss fight itself isn't the worst, I'm just going to put it in low C tier. Spurned Progeny. I really like this boss, but it has some issues. Its first phase is great. He's got some good attacks that are well telegraphed, and it makes you feel like you're fighting a big monster, which is the most important part about fighting a big monster. The only problem is this first phase is too short. He normally starts covering the floor in lava when he's about 75, even 80% of his HP, which means for the other 3/4 of the fight, you're fighting him during his second phase. Now he does have a solar bomb attack he does during the second phase, and I believe after he uses it the second time, the lava on the ground goes away, so you can technically go back to the first phase, but by that point I think he's already down and out of commission, and you can basically just attack him freely. The second phase isn't bad though. From what I'm saying right now, it kind of makes it seem like I don't like it, but it's actually really cool and intimidating to see this guy walk towards you. The attacks and everything are well telegraphed and interesting enough, but the hitboxes. The hitboxes on this boss are broken. I remember them being bad when I originally fought him, and then I thought they got better in subsequent runs, but after replaying it recently, they're still pretty bad. It's mainly just the fact that his hand slaps you from way too far away, and since this guy has a large pool of health, and the fact that he just slaps you even when you're properly dodging, makes this boss fight drag on a very long time, and it can honestly just get a little bit tedious. If the hitboxes were fixed in the second phase, and if he actually transitioned to the second phase at like maybe 60% HP, easy A tier. But for now, I honestly think it's high B. Skinstealer is our Lightreaper at home. Like, he's got a more simplified moveset, he's basically just discount Lightreaper. There's not much to say about him, so I'll just put him in B tier. The Sacred Resonance of Tenacity. This guy has way too many enemies in his boss arena, until you realize that he does his bang bang attack and he just kills all of them and you don't even have to deal with him. It's a solid mini boss, slow attacks, easy to read. He's okay, nothing too crazy. I'll put him in C tier. Griefbound Rowena. Now this one, I don't even really know if I want to count it as a mini boss. One of those other enemies that just kind of summons things to fight for you and creates a little bit of a mini gank. And then it's reused almost immediately after you beat it. Like, I think you just run around for like another 2 or 3 minutes and then you'll encounter them again. I know that all these sinners or mini bosses are used later on in the game, but the Ruiner, Skinstealer, Sacred Resonance, Hound Lady, all of them get reused, but at a later point in game. So there's kind of a little bit of a buffer between your next encounter for them. But the Griefbound one, the Kinrangr Guardian, and the Infernal Enchantress, you just encounter them basically immediately after you beat them. So yeah, I'm just going to put them in D tier at the bottom. The Bringer of Stillness, Nullity, and Silence. This trio surprised me. I hated seeing these as common enemies. I was actually afraid of them. Like, I'd just run away whenever I saw one of these Reapers. That first duo at the very beginning of the game left a lasting impression. But after fighting this trio, it was honestly great. I learned the attack patterns and how to properly fight the Reapers, parry them. There are 3, but it never feels like they gank you because of the way their attacks and stuff are timed. It's just a really well-made mini-boss, and I actually like these guys a lot. Might be surprising to some people, but I'm gonna put them in A tier. Harrower, Dervla, and the Unbroken Promise. The first phase of this boss fight is perfect. The attacks, delays, visuals, music. The music is amazing, but it needs to be fixed since it doesn't play after you fight it the first time. The first phase, in my opinion, is an easy S tier. The second phase, not so much. The design of the boss goes down a lot, and then this phase just has some poorly telegraphed attacks. Like, his slap and little explosion basically have no tell whatsoever. There are some good things done, and he continues with the delays and adds some cool things with the nail attacks, but all in all, the boss fight goes from S tier to like B tier, maybe A tier. So I guess you could average it out and put it in high A tier. I'm going to put it in S tier. Abiding Defenders. An interesting tag team boss fight, where one of them stays as this ranged attacker, spawning in magical attacks from a distance, and the other one has these slow attacks and is up close and personal. To beat these two, you have to divide your focus, because they'll resurrect each other if not killed around the same time. It's a solid mini-boss, and it kind of teaches you to pay attention to what's going on. Easy B tier, maybe even A tier. The next mini-boss, though, this guy actually sucks. Blessed Carrion Knight. If you don't pop his Umbra Balloon, I'm pretty sure he just revives infinitely, which is just dumb. You're kind of punishing the player for a very, very niche gimmick. And then he also has this AoE Poison Breath that covers the entire bridge for an extremely long period of time. As far as I know, there's no way to counter it. You can go to the corners since those don't get poisoned, but then you're just stuck fighting in a tiny corner. The regular melee attacks from this enemy are fine, but the AoE and absurd resurrecting just kind of ruins the fight. Honestly, bottom of D tier, probably the worst mini-boss fight in the game. The boss fight immediately after this one, though, is a huge step up. Tancred is a solid fight. His attack patterns are very similar to the Hush Saint. I mean, I think they're actually pretty much identical, apart from a few differences with the Radiant stuff, but his actual physical swings are the same. That being said, though, he does have some cool additions with his Shield Slam and all of that stuff with more radiant looking orbs, and it's one of the coolest looking bosses in the entire game. The voice acting as well is also on point. The second phase is difficult to look at. It's super creepy, and that was the point. The way it moves and attacks is just disturbing. There's a lot of complexity to the way the boss reacts depending on your playstyle, with more jumps and back feet slams if you're under it up close and personal, and more frontal headbutts, swings, fireballs, and flamethrowers if you're kind of in front of it keeping your distance. You can also damage any of the legs to stun it, and then you get those very satisfying grievous strikes in. It's a good boss fight with a solid second phase. Honestly, no real complaints about this one. If it was a little bit more original in the first phase, S tier, but still a solid A tier. Abbess Ursula. This boss does a ridiculous amount of damage. Their attacks are very easy to read and you can very easily dodge them and react to them. But again, this boss's damage is super high for no reason whatsoever. It's not a bad fight, but it's not well balanced. And because of that, I'm putting it in C tier. Judge Cleric. I'm pretty sure everyone knows where this boss is ranking. The music and visuals during this fight is just great. Heck, the way you start the fight itself is awesome. Her melee attacks aren't anything super crazy, but the extra radiant moves, arrows, and spells are all a great addition. They add difficulty without being too much. The arrow in the middle is kinda meh, since it's just a runaway mechanic, but it's also not the worst. It kinda makes you move around the map a little bit more. The second phase becomes easier in the sense that the attacks become more simple, but they deal more damage. He does have a few teleporting and more fireball attacks and whatnot, so it does add some new unique things to the gimmick, while also removing other things from the first phase. I know a lot of people dislike her passive explosive spam, but all in all it's actually not that bad, and the fight overall across both phases is well designed. A lot of people might have no idea about this fellow. I don't even know if he's in the game anymore, and that's the Spirit of the Bleak Season. This is the Scarlet Shadow or Red Reaper, but as a boss with a pumpkin head. Nothing unique with its attack since it's a copy of the standard Reapers you see literally everywhere. Like the Scarlet Shadow, you can't heal while fighting it, and I think it slowly withers away your health as well. I'll just throw him in low B tier, and I'll also throw the Scarlet Shadow in with it. And the reason for this is just kind of the surrounding thing around the Red Reaper overall. It's just that feeling that it gives you that you gotta get out of Umbral as quick as possible, which I know some people don't like, but that's the entire point, and it's what the devs were going for. So this boss fits its purpose well. The Rapturous Huntress. This boss fight is well executed. She actually feels like a huntress, the way she jumps at you, and the arena plays in really well to the way she uses her spells, like the cages and whatnot. Her breaking line of sight and some of the attacks that she does can be annoying. I know that's kind of part of her gimmick. It also lowers the boss fight in my eyes just a little bit. Still a good boss fight though. We'll put it in B tier. Elianne the Starved. The upgraded version of Pieta, kind of. This is the hardest fight in the game, and it's nice how it takes the original fight and adds more to it. The moves that Elianne does are basically just an upgraded version of the original, and she's got a good kit overall when she's attacking you herself. The problem arises when she spawns her clone, and this is because the clone has a more limited moveset, kind of even more limited than Pieta. Once you defeat the clone, you do get to get off good damage, and it is quite satisfying to do. And then Elianne does this Eye Tornado attack, but then after that she just continues to summon the clone again most of the time. So you're basically just fighting the clone with a limited moveset, and then you combine that with quite a large amount of projectiles that Elianne herself throws at you from a distance, which are fine for the most part since the eyes deal wither damage, but there are some cases where the eyes actually just deal regular damage, and it can feel like a bit much, kind of unfair at times. Elianne herself, if she was fighting you the entire time, is a good upgraded version of Pieta. When she summons the clone and then does those aerial attacks and you gotta be even more aware of your surroundings, again, feels like an upgraded version of that original really great boss fight. But I think a little bit of things need to be tweaked here and there to turn it into a masterpiece. Still a really great fight, the most difficult one in the game, and lots of fun actually playing it. Still goes into S tier in my opinion. The Sundered Monarch. Another one of those bosses with good lore surrounding them. This boss has really well telegraphed attack, with the swords glowing telling you when to roll, a giant slam attack that just feels super satisfying when you dodge it, these blade throws and barrages that are always super easy to read when they're coming. This is a good boss fight. The second phase is similar, it adds a little bit more difficulty here and there. Feels like an appropriate step up while not being super crazy. Maybe some people would have liked him to do a little bit more. Overall, I think it's a solid boss fight. But I think top of A or bottom of S is quite fair. General Angstorm. He's like the ultimate NPC, or humanoid boss fight. This dude has everything. Projectiles, rush attacks, giant AoE attacks, switch ups, melee combos. Literally, if the attack exists in the game, this guy probably has it. The only problem with this guy is that he's kind of too OP for his own good. His basic attacks have like 360-degree tracking, which basically means the only effective way to deal with it is to just roll out of range, which kind of doesn't seem too fun. And some of his attacks just straight up have no tell. You just have to remember what's going to happen when he does it. What I mean by this is when he creates some of those spikes with his hammers, he does it in an X pattern. But the way the terrain works, it makes it so that you can't even see the spikes in the ground before they appear half the time. So, not great. It's still a good fight, but it just needs to be more readable with more telegraphed attacks, especially for those AoE ones. Because of that, I'm thinking low A tier since it is really fun to fight this guy, but he does need a bit of polish, so low A top of B feels pretty fair. Adir, the big bad of the series, and a big letdown for pretty much everyone. The story and lore surrounding him is really good. His dialogue, if you actually care about the story and pay attention to what he's saying during the boss fight, is really good, but he's not a boss fight. He's essentially the Hollow Crow. He's just a background piece you look at while you fight enemies. Only unlike the Crow, he does literally nothing. So while it's better in the story department compared to the Crow, it's worse in the actual fight department. It pains me to do this, but he's a D tier boss. The only reason I'm not putting him at the very bottom is because the lore kind of saves it in my eyes. That is the Lords of the Fallen boss tier list.